Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Delta Stewardship Council meeting on a Friday. We are starting exactly on time at 9:30 here at the California Natural Resources Agency in Sacramento. I'm Gail Miller. I'm vice chairing today and hope Julie is enjoying some very well-deserved time for a family vacation. And next, Emma will explain how the public can participate.
If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment on any agenda item during today's meeting, please send an email blue card to engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov as seen on the screen. Be sure to note your name and the agenda item that you wish to speak on. When called, the clerk will unmute you.
Great, thank you. In accordance with Bagley-Keene requirements, we'll conduct a roll call of council members and establish a quorum. Emma, will you take the roll, please?
Absolutely. Councilmember Burgess.
Here.
Councilmember Waso.
Here.
Councilmember Moranian.
Here.
Councilmember Patterson.
Here.
Councilmember Zingali.
Here.
Vice Chair Miller.
Here. Thank you very much, Emma. Next, we'll turn to public comment. If the public wishes to comment on any item not on the council's agenda. Emma, do we have anyone ready to speak on public comments on items not on today's agenda?
We do not have public comment.
Great, thank you. Next, we will move to the consent calendar, and we have one item on the consent calendar. It's just adoption of the August 28th, 2025 meeting summary. Are there any public comments on the items on the consent calendar, Emma?
No, Madam Vice Chair.
Great, thank you very much.
Through the chair, I don't remember related to this commission, council, if someone that was not at the meeting can vote on it or if they should recuse themselves.
So I think you would be abstaining.
I will be abstaining then. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
I'll move to adopt.
Thank you. Great, we have a motion and a second. May we take the roll, please, Emma?
Councilmember Burgess has recused herself, so we'll begin with.
Actually, I'm sorry, Emma, she's just abstaining from the vote.
Abstaining.
Not recusing.
Sorry.
I
I'm
apologize for that.
sorry.
No, thank you.
Councilmember Waso.
Aye.
Councilmember Moranian.
Aye.
Councilmember Patterson.
Abstain.
Councilmember Zingali.
Aye.
Vice Chair Miller.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Great, the minutes are adopted. Next, this is a great moment for me that I get to announce our newest council member, Ann Patterson, who I had a great privilege of working with in the governor's office. I often think if people understood how incredibly hard government works, we would actually be living in a different world than we are. And Ann is just one of those people. Ann has led the governor's office since 2019 with incredible grace and professionalism and incredible dedication to the people of California and the truly the values we hold dearest and making things work better, go faster. And it's been honestly a pleasure to get to work with Ann, both as legal affairs secretary, deputy or chief of staff, cabinet secretary. She's done it all. And I think California is actually in a much better place today now than it was before. So really incredibly grateful, Ann, that you're here, that we're going to work on these issues together. And I know that maybe a couple others of us just maybe would want to say a word of welcome.
Yeah, just echo everything you just said. And I have to confess, I've worked with both Ann and Gail closely, and being flanked by the two of them is a little intimidating because they were always the best prepared, way ahead of me in every respect. So hopefully it's going to raise the bar and you're going to see a better council member out of me too.
Thank you.
Welcome. As a resident of the Delta and as someone that represents the Delta Protection Commission, I am very excited to have someone who is so well received from everybody. And I invite you to the Delta to introduce you to the people of the Delta and to enjoy the Delta.
Yeah, well, welcome. I was in a meeting last night, in a board meeting, and somebody was arguing if we should have term limits and have people come and go and change. And some people said, no, 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 it's good because longevity and all that. And we kind of like concluded that it's such a good thing to have new members. So welcome.
Thank you.
And also, welcome. You're gonna really enjoy the Delta Stewardship Council.
Senator,
so-
microphone.
I'm sorry. We're really pleased to have you. You're gonna really enjoy the Delta Stewardship Council. It's a wonderful area that we represent. As I was mentioning to you, visiting the communities of the Delta is one of my favorite things to do. I'm sure you'll enjoy the farms and the wineries and all the small little beautiful towns that are in the Delta. It's just a pleasure to serve on this council and represent the interests of the Delta, water quality, the economy, everything in the entire community. So with your background, I think you're going to fit right in
Mhm.
and hit the ground running. So we're very pleased to have you. Welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, council members, for that very warm welcome. I am really looking forward to getting to dig into the science. The Delta, plays such an incredibly important role in California, across the country, and really the world, and is so important economically and culturally to the state and to the people who live in the Delta. And I am very much looking forward to participating in helping to create sustainable plans and strategies for the Delta and for the state. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, speaking of service, and I do think one of the best things of serving in the state of California and public service generally is we get to stand on the shoulders of the people that came before us. And Judge Damrell is one of those really remarkable people. And we have a little montage we're going to play simultaneously. Still? Yeah, it's coming. Okay. But I do think Judge Damrell served on this council for 12 years, and we all had the honor of serving with him. He has an incredibly deep understanding of the Delta and of the law, and truly of a time when service was one of the most honorable and best things we could do with our time. So I think we will sincerely miss his contributions and wish him all the best as on his appointment to the California ABC, the Alcoholic Beverage Control Appeals Board. And we have this collage up here, which is just a few moments of his service, including a fantastic baseball picture. And really, I think have a debt of gratitude to him and for him and his service to the people of the Delta and the people of California. So we truly honor him today and would invite anyone to say a few words to Judge Damrell. And we do plan to share this with him so that he will be able to hear all our gratitude.
I just want to start because
Please.
when I joined on my first term, he was instrumental in not only telling me how important the Delta water supply and all these issues are, but what is really the role of a constructive, positive board member, and what is the role of the board. And I learned a lot from him just watching. And sometimes people don't know when you learn from them, but I just watching him learn so much. And his legal opinions in our closed meetings and stuff was just, we took so much direction from him. And I'm glad that, he was here and he gave what he gave. And I'm really, wishing him the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Also, I'd like to make a few comments related to his contribution and just the years and years that he dedicated to the community here, representing the community, and really to his legacy. I remember when I first got appointed, as people reached out to me and congratulated me for my appointment, everybody asked about the judge. Is Judge Damrell still there? And how is he doing? And everyone had a story about him and how they knew him. And in going into the communities, I found the same thing, that he had a very strong connection with our communities in that. So there were so many people that asked about him, wished him the best, and had a very fond words to say about him. So we're really going to miss him here. But I think as he moves on to do other things, I think his legacy is very well intact here, and his contributions to our community will be really remembered for many years.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, it was an honor to serve with someone that's been doing this for a long time. And he brought a lot of history and institutional knowledge. He is such a kind man and funny. But I also really observed that he had a relationship with our staff, and that there was a real affection and respect in this man who has given so much. So, Judge, we will miss you here. We appreciate all you've done, and we look forward to seeing what other good stuff you're going to do on this next committee. So thank you very much.
Just a friendly reminder that if you are not speaking, to please turn your microphone off. We have a couple mics that are engaged. We're on the cusp of feedback. Thank you.
Judge, this is Daniel. I'll just add my personal thanks. First, starting with you orienting me on the kind of legal landscape of this assignment when it was new to me, but before you were here, Jorge. The judge really helped me get some grounding there. I always tried to follow your lead just in terms of knowing what was important, because so much of the time you were so respectful of the staff that we didn't hear a lot from you. But then when you leaned in, you showed respect by asking really tough questions for all of us. And I always admired that, appreciated that. I loved the side time that we spent just sharing some stories and learning some history from you. And wish you all the best on ABC. They're lucky to have you, and we'll miss you here.
Well, I am not going to have the privilege of serving with Judge Damrell here. Maybe people don't know this, but I actually served as a law clerk to Judge Damrell for 2 years in his chambers when he was in the U.S. District Court and the Eastern District. And so he has been a mentor to me for my entire career. I just still remember sitting in chambers with him, kind of having him, wax on about life in Modesto, was practicing law. He has had such an incredible career representing interests in the Central Valley, in the Delta, in California. And everything he did with incredible intelligence, courage, integrity, and just with his whole heart. So when he was on the judge on the federal bench, he became active with all the different judges, going back and lobbying in DC for more resources for the Eastern District. So everywhere he was, he jumped in with his whole heart to represent people. Service was so important to him. And I just have 2 stories that I want to share that I think are emblematic of who he was. When I was working for him when he was on the bench. The first was we had to interview law clerks. So we had 2-year clerkships, but we would the 2 clerks in chambers would do the first round of interviews and then present the candidates to him, and he would interview them at the end. We'd probably have 4 or 5 who made it to that point, and he would make them sit in the little waiting room with his assistant and secretary, and he would always make them sit there for 5 or 6 minutes, just the 2 of them. And after the interview, he would come and bring his assistant in and ask, how did they treat you? And that was, if they did not treat that person at the front desk with respect and kindness, if they ignored them, they were out. And that was just part of who he was as a human being. It's what he brought. It's like, you treat everyone with respect and kindness. And I know I could kind of see that he probably brought that same ethos to his time here. And the other is, we would have law and motion calendar every couple of weeks. And so people, litigants would come in. This was all sort of motion practice, summary judgments, motions to dismiss. And we would often have sometimes pro se litigants, maybe not very well, briefed papers sometimes. And it'd be obvious from the papers, kind of maybe sometimes what the result was going to be. And he would always, if we were going to rule against somebody, we'd always have a hearing. And the judge would ask questions, and he would give them an opportunity to make their case to him before he ruled, because he felt it was important to the process that people have that opportunity. And I think he brought that same ethos to everything that he did, which is service, and also giving people that sense of being heard was important to him. So I love you, Judge Damrell. I miss you. And I'm sad we won't be able to work together here, but I wish you absolutely the best in your next adventures. I know you will bring the same spirit of service to that next adventure.
That was really beautiful. I would, if it's okay, I'll say just a couple more things, but if anyone in the audience or any of the team have words to share with the judge, I would love that. And then I would just encourage people, if anyone is listening, we absolutely really are eager to share uh, just anything about your experience with the judge and an opportunity for us to then take it back to the judge and his family. I do think it's really important. I do just want to acknowledge that on my upper right is Phil Eisenberg, and seeing the picture of, and we didn't do a tribute, maybe we still can, to Phil Eisenberg on this committee, but seeing a picture of Judge Damrell and Phil Eisenberg together is emblematic of what we can accomplish as a state and just their incredible legacy of service here. So I really do appreciate the team making sure we had that picture up there of Phil. Jessica, should I finish the quick comments and then turn to comments from everyone? Okay. So Delta Week, speaking of the incredible legacy of Phil Eisenberg and Judge Damrell, it is this week, and it was created in 2022 by a Senate concurrent resolution to acknowledge the high value of the Delta and the multiple benefits of a healthy Delta region. The 3 state agencies are excited to once again celebrate the vital role the region plays in California. The next quick announcement is California Native American Day at the Capitol is taking place today from 10 to 2. In an effort to further the council's tribal engagement, staff will be tabling with the Delta Protection Commission and Delta Conservancy at the event. And we hope to continue learning from the advocacy and sovereignty of those being recognized on this monumental day. And we'd invite you to learn more about the event by visiting the CaliforniaNativeAmericanDay.com. That's all one word, CaliforniaNativeAmericanDay.com, and that's one N. So please learn more about that. And then I got to go to New York City. It was Climate Week and the UN National Assembly, and it really does unite global leaders to address urgent environmental challenges and shape long-term climate solutions. In the Delta, California, and in California generally, climate change threatens much of what we do, but certainly the Delta we see a lot of the microcosm of how climate change affects everything. So it's water supply, ecosystems, communities, and the economy. So great opportunity to highlight that. And I would highlight huge commitments from other countries in terms of climate change, and California, for those of you that are interested, had a really significant presence at this year's Climate Week. So just to encourage all of you to look at that and how well California is moving forward. With that, I would invite folks online to sign up for a public comment if you're interested in commenting on any of these items. But I think first we'll turn to anyone in the audience that wants to share a few words.
Not in the audience per se, but have a microphone before me. And yes, I mean, I served with Judge Damrell for the entirety of his term for 12 years. So that's approximately 144 council meetings that we got to sit at the same table together. We went through a lot during that time, as you might imagine, and really formed a deep bond. So I'm certainly planning on keeping in touch with Judge Damrell, working with a few others to figure out how to get down to Modesto and celebrate him with a lunch. And then staff have put together this lovely certificate of appreciation for him, which we will also be delivering, as well as summarizing the remarks that you guys have provided today, and a clip to the video as well. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And just briefly, as you know, as the legal counsel for the council, working with somebody the caliber of Judge Damrell is an absolute pleasure. An Article 3 judge, all the accomplishments he's had in his legal career is something that an attorney would aspire to. But I've always found him to be a model public servant and somebody that you would aspire to be. With the dignity, gravitas, commitment that he showed to this council is just exemplary, and I'm going to miss him.
Great, thank you for the opportunity. Just to echo the comment about hard questions and humor, my fondest memory of Judge is always asking me the question, so just tell us, is the Delta better or worse? And which elicits the response, it depends. And, but I'm always prepared for that question because of him, because I think that's what matters to people to understand how we're doing, what's the trajectory.
Okay, one of us have to carry on that tradition. I think that's a great question. Anyone else? No? Great. Any public comment, Emma?
We do not have any public comment, Madam Vice Chair.
Great, thank you.
Did you want to see if any of the other members had any updates?
Oh, I do want
Supervisor
to
Burgess.
see that. Thank you, Jessica. Do any of the members have any updates? Sorry, Councilmember Burgess.
Thank you for the opportunity. Delta Protection Commission met, I think it was last week, right, Tom? That was last week. Time is so weird. We interviewed various candidates for our executive director position, and we are in the process of going through all of the motions to get that taken care of, and then we will announce that once it happens. I also just want to say I got to drive the Delta today to get here, and I just wanted to give you a picture of all of the foliage that's starting to look like it's changing. I got to see the water as the sun was coming up and the mist, and then I got to get to the other side and see the shadows. Saw the tractors coming in from the agriculture and all the folks that work in the Delta showing up. And I just wanted to give you that picture of the Delta today because it's just beautiful out there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We should all start our mornings that way. Anything? Anyone else? No? Thank you very much. So I'll turn it over to our executive officer, Jessica Pearson, for the executive officer's report, please.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll also extend my welcome to Councilmember Patterson. Looking forward to working with you. A reminder that we are conducting a survey to inform the update to the council's public participation plan. Public participation is fundamental to the council's mission and work, and the feedback that we get through the survey will help us better understand the needs of the public and improve our community engagement practices. So the survey is open through October 2nd. The survey is linked on our homepage, or you can use the QR code that we are putting up on the screen now. So I encourage everyone to participate. We have no new covered actions that have been filed since our last meeting. For those interested in timely notifications of these filings, I encourage you to sign up for our listserv on our website. I do want to highlight some updates to our website, deltacouncil.ca.gov. We have a new page designed to better communicate the Delta Plan's covered actions process and authorities and related information. So on our homepage now, we have a new drop-down menu at the top that's going to be entitled Covered Actions. That drop-down has two links, a new webpage where the public can learn more about our certification and appeal processes and how they work, as well as additional resources. One of those resources is a direct link to a video from our July council meeting where staff provided an overview of our certification of consistency and appeal processes. And a second tab on the drop-down menu goes down to our Covered Actions portal, where state and local agencies can publicly certify their projects. So the purpose of this update is to strengthen the user experience, making it easier to access this information and more accessible directly from the front page of our website. And in our monthly board packet, we produce a full list of Delta activities that we are tracking at any given time. This is called our active projects list, and it's findable on our website, and we update that monthly. Any questions on any of this, the public can contact engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov. We did send a comment letter to the Delta Protection Commission on September 8th, and this was regarding their preliminary study on farmland conversion in the Delta. Their draft study estimates that roughly 36,000 acres, or about 8% of total farmland, have been or are planned for conversion, and this is primarily due to habitat restoration and flood control projects, as opposed to urban development. Our letter outlines our support for affirming the numbers underpinning this study and for identifying strategies to avoid or reduce impacts of water supply, flood control, and habitat projects on existing agricultural land. So we're looking forward to continuing to collaborate with the commission and have a dialogue about the numbers as the report progresses.
Comment on that?
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think the conversation that's been brought up on ag land conversion has been a little stressful on some folks, but I think that it's the intention to just talk about it. It's not, taking a position of a problem with that. I think this is a healthy conversation because we're all looking to do the right thing and make sure we, accomplish these goals. So I just want to say, I think your input and other folks' input has really helped make it a better conversation. And I look forward to more of those conversations. And I also will be participating in a LAFCO conference next month where they want to talk about the impacts of housing on agriculture. So I just think it's interesting that everybody's kind of looking at, we're trying to do all of these things and meet these goals, but what are the impacts? And I think it's good to talk about it because we've got to kind of weigh it. So I appreciate the letter, and I just wanted to kind of help people understand that this wasn't an approach to criticize, but to just talk about it.
That's great. And I appreciate that. I mean, when you look back at the Delta Protection Act, I mean, one of the original purposes of the Delta Protection Commission was to protect ag land from urban development at the time was the threat. And then similarly in 2009 with the Reform Act, that was carried forward to the secondary zone, and then the council's regulations have certainly had an impact on protecting those areas as well from urban encroachment. So it's important that we continue to look, though, at other unintended consequences as we try to reach our goals. So thank you.
Thanks, JP.
On September 25th, we also sent a comment letter to the city of Rio Vista, and this is regarding the draft environmental impact report for their general plan update 2045. This update would establish the city's approach to development, transportation, and environmental quality. And so the council provided some comments and invites the city to engage with our staff in early consultation to discuss consistency with the Delta Plan. So both of those letters are available online and in your packet. I have 2 personnel announcements for you this month. I'm so excited to welcome back Audrey Cho, who was recently appointed by Governor Newsom as Legislative and Policy Advisor here at the council. As many of you know, Audrey was most recently our Executive Fellow, and so we're so happy to have her return in this position starting next week, and I have a long list of things for her to do. And on a related note, I'm excited that the council was selected to host a new Executive Fellow, Alec Cruz. Alec is here, I believe. Wave. Alec is a recent graduate of the University of California, Berkeley with a BA in Urban Studies. He was an assistant planner with Stanislaus County and previously contributed to affordable housing development as an assistant project manager with Mercy Housing. Alec is primarily going to be helping out with our climate adaptation work, but we'll certainly make sure that he dabbles while he's here. We're happy to have him on board. He started this week. And I can't help myself, but I just have to recognize that each year there are only 18 executive fellows and many more agencies who apply to host those fellows. And amazingly, Alec will be the council's 10th executive fellows in 14 years of operating as an agency. So that's pretty cool and shows that we have a great reputation for having providing excellent experiences for our fellows. So we'll do the same for you, Alec. On to our outreach highlights. We do have an update. This month's top performing social media content promoted the council's upcoming Adaptive Management Forum. The forum is focused on making sure we are learning by doing as we do restoration actions in the Delta, since we don't always know how ecosystems will respond to those actions. Adaptive management ensures we have a structured way to move forward amid uncertainty. So the communications team drew on the excitement around Taylor Swift's new album with a themed graphic and caption featuring song references, hashtags, and links, and it drove strong engagement and clicks across all platforms. So just as a reminder, the forum is taking place October 14th and 15th. It will include on the second day a tour of the Lookout Slough Restoration Project. Day 1 has online or in-person registration options. Last I checked, there were still a few spots in the tour as well. So if you're interested in that, please email adaptivemanagement@deltacouncil.ca.gov. brief bill update. We don't have a full legislative update, although we will next month when Audrey's back. As you know, we've been closely following Senate Bill 650, which would make some minor changes to the Delta Reform Act. And you may recall that the council took a support position on this bill earlier this year. The good news is that the bill was enrolled and presented to the governor on September 9th. So we are awaiting his action and we'll keep you updated. Okay, so looking ahead on the agenda today, we have 3 items that are focused on different Delta science efforts, ranging from the complexities of wetland carbon emissions to extreme weather events and recovery of Delta smelt. So these 3 agenda items do share some key themes, including the importance of long-term scientific data collection, the importance of compiling, analyzing, and communicating that data, and innovative approaches for acting on accumulated knowledge. So in other words, research doesn't automatically yield knowledge that you can immediately apply in the real world all the time, but it's really the accumulation of that data and information over time that yields the understanding, and only when communicated then to the right audiences. So it is a process. So with that framing, next we're going to hear from Delta lead scientist Dr. Lisa Marie Windham-Meyer alongside 2 special guests who will talk about their research on carbon emissions in the Delta, which is a major source of methane emissions, and the potential for leveraging that research to inform the future sale of carbon credits in the carbon market. Understanding wetland carbon emissions is really critical to managing climate change and could unlock some more sustainable farming options for Delta farmers in the future. Council staff is then going to present highlights from the newest edition of the State of Bay Delta Science, which is a major scientific synthesis initiative coordinated by our Delta Science program. The latest issue compiles information from hundreds of other publications to shed insight on extreme climate and weather events in and around the Delta. And then lastly, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California staff are here to present on their Delta smelt and native species preservation project. And that's looking at innovative ways of supplementing Delta smelt populations by farming them in human-made ponds in the Delta. So with all of that, I conclude my report. I'm happy to answer any questions or move to public comment. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Daniel?
Thank you, Jessica. Helpful as always. I had a question about the September 8 letter to the Delta Protection Commission in the packet from Jeff. One of the things it recommends is that restoration projects use the Good Neighbor checklist, which seems like a good idea. But I also see that the Good Neighbor checklist specifies having conversations with landowners. And then later there's a reference to mitigating any negative impact on farmers. Again, all good. But what about non-land owning residents? What about farm workers? Are they omitted here for a reason, or should we be more inclusive of that in that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, Jeff, if you remember anything on that topic, but the Good Neighbor checklist was essentially a recommended checklist that we work together with the Delta community to include in the Delta plan.
Yeah.
It is recommended, it's not a regulation, and it provides a list of what are the best practices for engaging. So I don't know, Jeff, if you could speak to that question. I think we mean everyone and not just landowners.
Good
but
morning.
Good question.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Zingali. It wasn't an omission in the sense that it was left out. It was the intent in the checklist as it's presented is to ensure that there are conversations that occur between the agencies proposing the restoration projects and the landowners that would be selling those properties for that purpose.
Right. So should there also be conversations with the others who would be affected by these restoration projects, the non-landowning residents and the farm workers, for example, their representatives, or as well as the farmers? Is that something we should consider?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's do that.
Well, and just kind of piggybacking on that, there's a lot of government-owned land that is farmed as well.
Yeah.
And that was one of the issues is that was discussed is that land could be going out of use for agriculture because it's being used for wetlands. And so that's not even private landowners. So, but I'm going to bring that to our folks too, to try to address.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for the comment.
Yeah, please.
And I want to compliment staff on their music choices for themes. I just wanted to give that compliment out.
You gotta continue to innovate as government on social media. Yes.
Indeed. So Jessica, just clarifying that we can then include, can we revise the letter to the commission just to include a broader?
Sure.
set of
I mean, I
stakeholders?
think we're having ongoing conversations through our Delta, our restoration subcommittee, which is not limited to Delta landowners and would include anyone who is concerned about impacts from restoration. So that's one way I think we can directly address that question. The Good Neighbor Checklist is adopted into the Delta plan. So, I mean, that would be a separate conversation, but certainly we can supplement the letter.
Great. So maybe we can supplement the letter and then later think through the good neighbor checklist as an action item for the council.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Is there any public comment, Emma?
No public comment, Vice
Great.
Chair.
Thank you. Well, I do want to congratulate the council on this incredible 10 executive fellows. That's amazing. Jessica and I were both fellows. Were you executive? And I was in the assembly. So it is an incredible program. Welcome, Alec. If we can be helpful, let us know. And also just really incredibly grateful that Audrey is willing to serve. And one of my mentors, Greg Schmidt, if any of you know him, would always say, and John Burton, that we should judge how well government's doing by whether or not young people want to get involved. So I really I think it's a great testament to us and to the state of California. So thank you and congratulations. Next, my favorite part of the agenda, our lead scientist report by Lisa Marie Wyndham Myers. And I think you have two guests presenting today as part of your report. And if you want to introduce them, I think they're probably coming up
Great.
online.
Thank you, Vice Chair Miller and council members. Yeah, let me invite Dr. Delwich and Dr. Anthony up to the dais, and there's a name tag, and you guys can set yourselves up there. I want to highlight that today's science updates are focused on climate responses, both adaptation to changing climate and mitigation of changing climate. So your week in New York is very apropos today, Gail. And we're going to start with a good news story, whereby our Delta investments in wetland restoration are yielding benefits that are even beyond fish recovery, flood risk reduction, and reversing subsidence on Delta islands. We're going to talk about carbon, the backbone of our peat soils, and the critical component of two greenhouse gases that we monitor here in the Delta, carbon dioxide, which is an oxidized form of carbon that we are all respiring out right now, just to put this in perspective. And then also we measure methane, and you might know that as natural gas. Drying out our Delta soils since the 1850s has led to emissions of more than 1 billion tons of atmospheric carbon dioxide. And just to put that in perspective, it's about 1/4 of annual US emissions right now on a yearly basis. And re-wetting our Delta soils can reverse that. And we know that now because of long-term high quality data, that those climate benefits that may seem that they're far out in the future, they're actually coming faster than we expected. And so if I can get the slides, this will be a graphic that you see in your meeting packet. It shows a decrease in methane emissions at one of our flagship subsidence reversal wetlands over the past 14 years. So notice that a reduction in methane emissions, that's the bar graph that is essentially of net emissions every year since 2011. You can see that the reduction doesn't happen for a few years. In fact, for this location, initial emissions were fairly high, and it took about 6 years for it to drop to a lower constant level of emissions. And this is why long-term research is so important. Nobody saw that coming. And now we have a better perspective and more positive perspective on wetland restoration on these wetlands. So I'm going to open the floor right now to our two invited speakers to talk more about what this means for the Delta and for California's ambitious climate goals. Today we have Dr. Kyle Delwich, lead author of this featured publication and a research scientist at UC Berkeley. She studies greenhouse gases and especially methane dynamics in the Delta. And we also have Dr. Tyler Anthony, a former Delta Science Fellow, but today a senior environmental scientist at the Department of Water Resources, and he serves as their specialist on greenhouse gas emission reductions and carbon sequestration strategies. So with that, I think we can go to slides.
Hello. Let me make sure this works. Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Delwich. Thank you for that introduction, Lisa Marie. I'm a research scientist at UC Berkeley, and I monitor carbon in the California Delta. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. All right, so we monitor carbon flux in the California Delta. You guys can't see the slides, right? Oh, okay, thank you. So we monitor carbon throughout the Delta. We have many different research sites. We have wetland sites, both restored and natural. We have a few agricultural sites, and then we have a legacy of past sites. So there's a big team of people that work on this, and we've gathered over the decades really a tremendous amount of data on the Delta. So I start with a little bit of background. Lisa Marie touched on this, but the wetland drainage that happened in the Delta in the 1800s leads to organic carbon loss. So all that carbon-rich peat, when it's exposed to the atmosphere, it starts to decompose. It's not working. Oh, there we go. Okay, carbon loss is CO2 emissions. So that carbon that was in the peat starts to oxidize and gets emitted as carbon dioxide, and the land subsides. So there's a lot of problems with this from the climate perspective. As Lisa Marie said, this is a large greenhouse gas source. So the push in recent years, decades, to restore some of these sites stops that carbon loss. So that's good for the climate. It also reverses subsidence, creates habitat, other benefits. But even more than that, the wetland becomes a net carbon sink. So it starts to actually take up carbon dioxide. And this is plants. So plants growing in the wetland, whether this is wetland vegetation or rice, if it's a rice paddy, take up that carbon dioxide, turn it into plant material. The plants die, get buried in the sediment. And as long as they stay there and are covered by water, they're not going to go back into the atmosphere. And so you create this really powerful long-term net carbon sink. So that's good. The caveat is that you also produce methane. And so methane is produced naturally in basically all wetlands. And methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. So it offsets a little bit some of the benefits of the carbon sequestration of wetlands. So I want to walk you through this a bit. The climate benefit of these systems, how good they are for the climate, there's multiple components. One is that avoided CO2 loss. So when you flood it, you stop those emissions. That's good. You start to sequester carbon in plants, also good. But then you emit methane, so that's not as good. The schematic will walk you through that. The benefit is not static in time. It actually changes over time, and that's due to some atmospheric chemistry dynamics, which I won't get into, but basically it changes. So this plot shows that on the y-axis, we have climate benefit. If you're in the top area, you're net cooling of the atmosphere. If you're in the bottom, you're net warming. And on that x-axis, there is years after restoration. And so at first, after the wetland is constructed, it is actually net warming of the climate. And this is because methane is such a powerful greenhouse gas on relatively short time horizons that it overpowers the effect of that carbon sink from a climate perspective. But the good news is, due to that atmospheric chemistry, the methane decays in the atmosphere, and in the long run, the wetland does become net cooling. And then as long as it stays flooded, it will continue to cool the atmosphere. And we can calculate this break-even point here. So this is the time that it takes for the wetland to become basically a net cooler of the climate. And this can look different for different wetlands, right? This is a different wetland, for example, and you see a much earlier break-even point. And this is because it depends on the balance of CO2, carbon dioxide, and methane change. So we need to measure it, and that's what we do. So we work throughout the Delta. We use a technique called eddy covariance, which is a lot of different sensors put together. So we put them on these, we call them towers. It's just scaffolding we put out in the field, put a bunch of sensors on them, and they measure the fast movement of gas, the wind velocity, and the gas concentrations. You put that together with some math, and you can get the actual calculations of carbon going into and out of the wetland. This is an example of what one of those looks like. This is at Rush Ranch down in Suisun City, and we have these all over the Delta. These are what some of those data look like. So this is from a Sherman Island restored wetland. This is Mayberry wetland, if you're familiar with it. The top plot here is the carbon dioxide sink, and the bottom is the methane emissions. And so this is 14 years of data, which I want to highlight for methane is one of the longest methane records in the whole world that we know of. So this is really exciting that we have these from the Delta. The squiggles are seasonal patterns. More happens in the summer when it's warm. And there's a lot going on here and a lot I could talk about, but I want to draw your attention to this decreasing emissions trend. So for methane, you can see that over the past decade, methane has been steadily going down coming out of this site, except for last year. But it's been steadily going down, which is good news for the climate and really shows how important it is to keep monitoring these wetlands because they change so much after you restore them. Well, that's blocked off. But if you do that calculation I was talking about the break-even point, if we had only been out there for, say, 5 years and had 5 years of data, oh, thank you, you would have calculated it would take 150 years for this wetland to start cooling the climate, which is not atypical, but it's longer than we would probably like. But fortunately, we've been out there a lot longer, and we have a lot more data, and now that calculation has come down to about 40 years. So this is good news for the climate, and it really shows us the value of these long-term data sets and the continued monitoring. And then I like to close just with a acknowledgement that these delta wetlands, aside from the methane, are some of the largest carbon sinks in the world. And so on long time horizons, they have a really tremendous potential to take up carbon, cool the climate, in addition to all of the other habitat benefits. So this is Dutch Slough, which is a restored wetland site near Oakley, and Rush Ranch, which is one of our natural sites in Suisun City. And both of these, we've measured some of the largest uptakes that have been recorded. And so really, they're fantastic ecosystems, and it truly is a privilege to work in them. Thank you.
Well, great, Kyle. Thank you for that great introduction to how we might be using these data sets to really implement climate solutions from DWR's perspective. So yeah, again, I'm Tyler Anthony. I'm a senior environmental scientist at DWR. I sit in the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives and DWR's climate change program as the carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emissions reduction specialist. So really wanted to talk about today about the potential to, or DWR's efforts on the potential to generate carbon credits to stimulate these as potential revenue streams for delta wetland restoration. And so you got a pretty good background already on wetland restoration in the delta, but really DWR is really looking at leading delta wetland restoration as one of its key nature-based climate solutions to meet both DWR and statewide climate goals. And really, DWR is leading this restoration to reverse subsidence, sequester carbon, enhance habitat, and essentially protect water quality with targeted restoration across the Delta. And this aligns with the council's 2 equal goals to ensure to protect our water quality and restore and enhance the Delta's ecosystem. And really, long-term research is why we're here. We got a great background on the amazing benefits that having long-term data gives us. It really helps us guide our decision-making, both in terms of where we should restore our wetlands, but also how to manage them moving forward. And DWR has been helping lead this supportive subsidence and carbon research really since 1997 with a number of collaborations across the Delta and across academic, state, and NGO agencies. And really generating these ID covariance data sets, which are really the gold standard for measuring greenhouse gas exchange with the atmosphere, has allowed us to develop this model and modeling and carbon market development to really be able to potentially tap some revenue streams to take advantage of this nature-based climate solution. And so I'll take a step back and talk about what is a carbon credit. So in the case of the Delta, Delta wetland restoration can generate credits through the American Carbon Registry, and these credits are emission reduction credits. So essentially these credits just represent verified reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So that's both net sequestration of carbon, but also avoided emissions from alternative land uses that might emit substantial amounts of carbon, like from drained peat soils. And so these credits can be sold to organizations to help offset their emissions to meet their net zero and other sustainability development goals. And there's slight differences between the voluntary market and the regulatory market, which I'll try to touch on in a second. But really, we've taken these long-term data sets and really helped develop this protocol and program to generate carbon credits at scale. And so today we are generating credits from Sherman and Twitchell subsidence reversal wetlands. You can see on the map here. And our first round of verification up through 2018 generated about 52,000 tons of carbon credits. And so 52,000 credits is about 52,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, either avoided or sequestered. And we're in the middle of verification projects for another 60,000 on the way. We hope to get those by the end of the year. If you take this on a per acre basis, that translates to about 6 credits per acre annually. And so depending on the value of these credits, might be able to leverage these to offset some of our long-term maintenance costs on these islands. And so really that leads into DWR is trying to explore the sale of these credits. And so they have the potential to help us offset our long-term management, but really the value of these credits are currently uncertain. DWR is the only entity that's generated wetland restoration credits in the Delta. And because we haven't sold them, we don't know what their true value is. Another aspect of this is that they're voluntary market credits. And so the price of a voluntary market credit is really up to the seller and the buyer. And so we need to have both a price that we're willing to sell them for and a buyer willing to pay that price to sell these credits. And so that's one way that we're trying to look at how selling a DWR would look. We're not quite sure who the buyer is. We're trying to work on finding potential there. And then also just our ability as a state agency to sell these intangible assets is something we're trying to figure out at this point. It's really something that state agencies haven't done in the past. But really from all of this research and the experiences we've had with the verification market, if we really want to try to scale these carbon credit projects to benefit the Delta-wide community, we have to leverage these high quality data sets, models, and remote sensing to really lower costs. We can't measure everything everywhere. We have very high quality data, but that data is expensive to generate. But we can leverage that to upscale these estimates across the Delta to really try to identify places that are ideal for these restoration projects to generate revenue. And so we can use tools like mobile towers. We might not be able to use these ecovariance measurements on shorter time scales to still get a good sense of what their annual budgets are, but then also leverage machine learning tools like the Regional Climate and Carbon Analytics tool that was recently published. And so really, I was just hoping to kind of have some call to action for potential next steps if this is something we hope to continue to use as a potential revenue stream and climate solution in the Delta, is that we really need to ensure that we take action to help scale this carbon monitoring accurately and effectively to benefit all potential users of this resource. And so this also can help us target restoration to maximize some of our benefits, identify the areas with the highest emissions and the highest potential for carbon sequestration, but then really also try to explore potentially classifying some of these wetland restoration techniques as carbon farming, as ag. That might help limit some of these potential barriers to implementation and also open up this potential to the broader community to generate revenue. Also trying to leverage private-public partnerships. In lots of cases, there's public land that might be available or ideal for this wetland restoration, but might be missing some of the capital investment costs needed to implement these at the time scale we need to address climate change. And then really just finding other ways to lower barriers to investments might also encourage more outside funding outside of public investment in this space. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Delwich and Dr. Anthony. You both made very clear the role of science and long-term monitoring and their role in our meeting climate goals for California that are very ambitious, achieving co-equal goals for us here in the Delta, and also attracting additional private investment to finance our management activities and other goals. And I want to take this opportunity to say that in this time of divestment and abandonment of scientific research infrastructure, not to mention climate science itself, the science community is facing threats to long-term research and monitoring. Today's highlighted research and its connections between science and practice are such a great reminder of the value of long-term data. So before my next 5 minutes of science program updates, I think we should open it to questions because having Drs. Delwich and Anthony in the room, two climate science and practice experts, is a rare opportunity. So I think we'll just let you guys answer questions as they come.
Great, thank you. That really a remarkable presentation. Thank you. Councilmember Burgess, Maranian, Peso. Great.
So in reading my packet, I got all excited about this. So just want to let you know. And then I need to do full disclosure. I have a real problem saying discretion. I didn't say it right, but just, I'm helping everybody understand who I am. Okay, first question I have is the covariance measurements. Is that based on the size of the project, the amount of water, the amount of CO2 that was already being, and I'm not a scientist and don't pretend to be one, but what is it that makes it vary as far as the.
That is a very good question.
Thank you.
Many, many people working on that. Carbon dioxide is a little bit easier. It doesn't vary quite as much. Methane is a really tricky beast, and there's many, many things. For example, one of the things that Mayberry wetland I showed you, this decreasing trend, we think it might have something to do with salt, actually. So salty water suppresses methane emission. So you're not going to get a lot of methane emissions if the wetland is saltier.
And is that naturally salt water, or is that salt from, say, ag that's present?
That's a good question. I would love to study that. We're in the process of actually studying where that salt is from, but I think in this particular wetland is an impounded wetland, so it's not a natural system. It's in a very subsided place of the delta, so it gets its water from the river, and folks at DWR actually work hard to balance the intake and output of water to keep those salt levels. They try to keep it as fresh as possible, although the data shows that maybe from a methane perspective, we should keep it a little salty, and that might help with the carbon.
Well, and with, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add, this is on the western edge of Sherman Island, so it is really at the confluence of
Where the-
brackish water and
right.
fresh water, so that might be some of the source of the salt water. And we are trying to take some of that data and really understand how we can balance this fresh water and saltiness to really maximize both our subsidence reversal, but also minimize methane emissions.
And if we see more saltwater intrusion, we might get more data on those kind of things. One of the first things that I thought of when I was reading the packet before this was the comparison, because there's a lot of grazing that's done on the Delta, and it's my understanding that that is also a source of methane. How does that compare?
Another good question.
Third one.
So global, if you look at the global
Right.
methane budget, agriculture and cattle are a significant component. Maybe I'll say 25%, don't
Right.
quote me on that. But it is big. In the Delta specifically, I do believe in the past, while ago, we did actually have towers that measured ecosystems with cows, and it was tricky because the methane signal would spike when the cows came into the frame, and so I believe there was a camera set up to track when cows came and went. So yes, cows do emit methane.
They poop and
burp, yeah.
and make methane.
Yeah.
So also there's been discussion about the amount of water needed for these types of restoration compared to agriculture. Is there a significant amount of water needed for these types of projects compared to agricultural things, or has that even been talked about?
It's definitely been talked about. Tyler, do you know the comparison of wetlands versus ag?
From DWR's perspective, we have done some back of the envelope calculations and does use slightly more water. But that's like Dennis Beldacki, one of Kyle's mentors and our mentors, really says there's no free lunch. And so
Right.
as you sequester carbon, you do have to use some of that water. But luckily, the Delta is a place that has lots of water. And wetland restoration is a place that can be more readily able to use saltier water to still get some of these benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've said this before many times, and I'm going to keep saying it. It seems like there's not a lot of plants to choose from. We're either talking rice or we're talking tules. Did I say that right? Tules? I always think I'm saying it wrong.
And cattails.
Say it again?
Cattails also grow.
Cattails.
Yeah.
Okay. And so are we, is there any effort to explore other plants, or what is the word for using the cattails and the tules?
Pollutoculture.
Are we looking into pollutoculture more?
We are trying to look into pollutoculture. DWR did try to collaborate with UC Davis and hydro-focused researchers on exploring the potential for tule biomass as pollutoculture for biofuels. But we're also just looking at different harvesting and biomass management methods to
Yeah,
try to.
for fiber and all that, correct?
Yes, yes.
I am going to hold on to your name because I'm really interested in sequestration, the economics of it. I feel like I'm supportive of it, but I'm also skeptical because looking at even just the current political environment, value of certain things can go down depending on other people's agendas. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but I think you got what I'm saying. Did you want to answer to that?
Well, I would like to add that we are trying to explore selling these credits for another reason because Carbs suggested that they would like to see some supply and demand for these credits on the voluntary market before you can adapt this methodology into the regulatory market. And the regulatory market automatically demands a higher value for these credits and continued demand for these into the future because of the recent extension of cap and trade.
And CARB is California.
Yes, California.
Now, and I'm looking for the American Carbon Registry. Is that state as well?
No, that is actually a global registry. So
Okay.
on the voluntary market, anyone can have a project that's registered with the American Carbon Registry, can generate credits, and you can exchange those credits with anyone in the world.
Right. So I know that there's certain projects in the Delta that are, doing these wetland restoration projects and they're doing rice farming. And those projects are intended to create revenue that's going to help for the maintenance of those projects. And so that's where I'm skeptical. Not that I'm not supportive, but I'm also wanting to make sure that we're doing something that is sustainable. So I'm really interested in these things. Let's see, my last question was, related to what you were saying. One of these slides showed USGS and it showed the university. Are we seeing cuts in the research and in the monitoring and testing as we go?
Yes, unfortunately.
Would you like to explain? I'm just shining lights on things. This is not a comment. It's just a statement of what we're seeing.
Yeah, so for our group, the Department of Energy funds, it's called Ameriflux, which is a big organization that gathers these eddy covariance data from all over the country and distributes it for scientific use and public use if they want it. So this network is really valuable. They also they pay people to take these measurements. And so one of our technicians who's been with us for decades and is amazing. He is scheduled to lose funding at the end of this year. And the department that Ameriflux is under is currently scheduled to be eliminated as far as I'm aware. So that'll be, for us, that would be that would be a tremendous loss. And then just in general, the grants that we typically apply to fund science and research, the calls aren't out there. And so finding money to keep this going is definitely getting harder. It was always hard. It's getting harder.
And we're talking about, emissions and that kind of thing. But does any of this also apply to public safety in certain ways that you're seeing?
Might be a question for Tyler. I don't really work in public safety.
Well, and public safety is the dependability on our levees. It's our water quality. It's the impact on people and animals. I'm just shining a light on things. I'm not trying it. Yeah.
Yes, I know it's certainly up for debate how far subsidence reversal has to be or how close it has to be to a levee to really lower the levee risk. That is something that's an active area of research, but essentially increasing subsidence within a delta island increases the accommodation space so that if that levee did fail, saltwater intrusion from the delta would have a higher volume of water coming in, and that could affect the time scale of us to respond to such an event in terms of water quality, but also just in terms of pumping that island out and protecting infrastructure on that island, both state and private assets.
Well, thank you for indulging me and letting me practice saying sequestration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Branian, and then
Yeah,
Councilmember
I
Wayso.
have two questions for Dr. Kyle and two questions for Dr. Anthony. So you talked about the cooling effect, and I understand the cooling effect, but the warming effect, and you talked about certain time and certain elements. Would you just highlight what those are?
Yes. So the cooling and warming is a balance between carbon dioxide and methane. And so the bad thing about methane is that it's a very potent greenhouse gas. You know, if you're looking at a 20-year time horizon, it's like 80 times stronger than carbon dioxide at warming the atmosphere. But the thing about methane is it doesn't last that long in the atmosphere. So it's emitted to the atmosphere, floats around, you know, for decades, and then it goes away. It's actually, you know, decayed. Whereas carbon dioxide lasts for centuries. So it's that's the critical piece, this atmospheric chemistry, the fact that methane does start to degrade. So initially, when you build a wetland, you're putting out a lot of methane. It's really powerful, and so that effect is large, you know, and you're taking up carbon, but it's not a large enough effect to dominate. But then over time, the effect of methane, it basically plateaus. And that's because it starts to decay in the atmosphere. And so, but on long time horizons, that because that carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for so long, the effect of removing it becomes more powerful and eventually starts to cool the
And
planet.
the timing of the warming effect is a standard number. I mean, it's always the same, or it's
No.
impacted by other elements.
The time it takes for a wetland to start cooling a wetland?
No, when the warming happens.
So when the wetland is built, I mean, unless it's emitting no methane, if it's very salty, if it's producing methane, it will be a warmer, and that climate warmer. So it really all depends on the balance of those two gases. So we have some systems that are not taking up a lot of carbon dioxide and emitting a lot of methane, and so for those, it would take a lot longer to see a net climate benefit. And then we have other systems, the saltier ones, that are emitting very little methane, but taking up a huge amount of carbon dioxide. And for those, it'll be a lot sooner. So it's all about the balance of those two gases.
But my question is that one gas and the warming effect of it is always a standard number. It's
Yes.
so many years. It's 100
Yes.
years, 10 years, 20. Yes. Okay. So there's not other elements that can make it faster or slower. That's really my question.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, no, not
Okay,
simple
right.
answer is no.
Okay, thank you. And then you talked about the salt from water quality standpoint. When salt is a benefit in terms of what you just said, then farming becomes more difficult in those because of the presence of that constituency in water. Is that true?
Well, I think I mean, the sites that we are currently working in, we don't have farming on rice, so I can't speak to that right now. But for the wetland plants, you know, there are a range of different plants that are adapted to different salt conditions, and you know, the tules and cattails, they do fine with a bit of salt. And you know, I mean, I've looked at the data, and you don't see like a strong impact with salt, but we're still trying to understand it more. There's a lot of nuance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I have two more questions, if possible. Oh, one is when we talk about the whole carbon cap and trade and in you know, the transfer of credits and all that, is there an issue of equity that is being considered when we do this process? Because in my experience, a lot of times when the cap and trade program starts, there are communities, areas, regions that really benefit and areas that really suffer from that whole idea. And usually those are areas that are already having problems, and they are deprived areas, and they're now getting another thing. And overall, the concept of cap and trade is a good concept, right? But who really benefits and not? Is this an element that you guys are considering when we talk about all this?
Well, yes. So I really think that's why we're trying to develop these tools that we can help scale these monitoring efforts. So not everyone has to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into research to generate the data sets needed to qualify for the carbon market. So we're really trying to work with broader Delta agencies and just other collaborators in the space to try to potentially build a place that you can centralize the data set and centralize some of the carbon accounting, so that it really lowers the barrier to entry to benefit from these projects. And
I
so-
just want to, I just want to encourage you to have that as an important element, because in my experience with similar kind of, the precedent of what we have done in the past with cap and trade, there were areas that really suffered from the whole idea of getting dumped with all this bad stuff
Yeah, and-
because, there was this carbon exchange or. Yeah, exactly. So that's an issue that now that we have that lesson learned from the previous precedent, we should be really aware of it. And then the other thing, you talked about the public-private partnership. In the public-private partnership is creating the system of the exchange, or it's to create the technology and resources? And if so, why would the private sector be interested? I'm always.
Yeah, so from my perspective, there's lots of potential interest from the private sector in developing nature-based climate solutions projects. And their investment strategy is usually forward-looking for calculating their net climate benefits. And so they might pay for a wetland restoration and then might ask for the carbon benefits of that restoration some X years into the future. And so you kind of say, okay, if we have some relationship with you that you help pay for the capital project and some potentially long-term maintenance costs, then you kind of get the credit for those credits, right? You get the ownership of those credits. And so they're investing in getting to net zero, but then also maintaining this wetland of the future. And one of the main barriers to investment in the Delta is just the ongoing land acquisition and ongoing land ownership costs. And so if the public can leverage their ability in that space to kind of lower those costs, that might improve some of these partnerships.
The private sector's interest is more long-term, and it's really how much of this credit they can get out of, because of the development that they're going to do in the future and all that. Okay. Thank you.
So I just want to understand the context of this and to make it clear what we're talking about here. Are we talking about these programs that are a function or result of the state's cap and trade program?
So my position is funded from cap and trade funds, but these projects were largely developed using bond funds for wetland restoration projects, but there are some greenhouse gas funded projects in DWR's current carbon monitoring protocols.
And my question is more as a function of, this is a result of cap and trade simply because cap and trade exists. And under the cap and trade program, they basically tax the highest polluters in the state. And whatever they measure as the highest pollution, I mean, there's a rate that they apply to that. And whoever you are that is the highest polluter, you have to pay, right? And if the payment is in the form of buying climate credits, you satisfy the state's requirement. The state gets this money, and the fact that they get the money doesn't clean the air. They have to make investments with the money that clean the air. So is this a product of basically informing the appropriations process and say this is the best way to spend this money to get the best result of cleaning or improving air quality?
Yes, some of these projects were funded for that reason, is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that there's a context of what we're talking about here. And so that goes to my question, because there are so many areas. And when I served in the legislature, the conversation was, what do we invest this money in? What would give us the biggest return on our investment? You can imagine that this conversation gets very political because we're mostly talking about money, and people want to spend money on whatever they want to spend it. And the conversation becomes, well, I need a park in my district, or I need, some mass transit or whatever it is. The conversation becomes more about what the community wants with this money, not what improves air quality. So in that sense, if is your hypothesis that investing money in wetlands restoration will give the state the biggest bang for its buck in terms of how they spend this money?
Well, I would say yes, because I think restoring delta wetlands is one of the highest quality nature-based climate solutions anywhere on Earth on a per acre basis.
Okay.
So the carbon benefits you're receiving on an annual basis is better than almost anywhere on Earth. Dutch slough is in one of the top 1% of all ecosystems anywhere in the world. That includes tropical rainforests in terms of sequestering carbon, even when accounting for methane emissions. So I do think this is some of the best bang for your buck, although there are costs associated with wetland restoration.
There are plants that have different longevity, different life cycles. Some, like weeds, prop up in a matter of, almost like days and last a short while and go away. And you can argue that they may, I don't know, but it seems to me that they may contribute more to methane production because they grow at such large quantities. And when they go away, they contribute to the decomposition process. And there are other plants that last longer, that have a longer life cycle, that may not contribute as much to methane production. Is that being looked at in the studies that you're doing? Are there plants in the wetlands that have a longer life cycle that will contribute? And that's assuming that that's what I'm saying is true. Is that part of your data set?
So within the wetland sphere, not really. We don't look at individual plant species. I mean, there's certainly a debate about if you're talking about nature-based climate change solutions, you could think about a forest, right? Because a tree is going to fix a lot of carbon. There's a lot of carbon in a tree, and it's going to stay there for a very long time. And so certainly you can compare forests to wetlands, and that's very active area of research right now. Forests have the fire problem. And the wonderful thing about a wetland is as long as it stays flooded, that carbon isn't going to go anywhere.
And
Yeah, I also wanted to add, tules are more resistant to decomposition than other plants, particularly invasive plants. So that is still a hypothesis we need to fully tease out, that some of these invasive plants might release more methane because they decompose faster, because they're just not as hardy as tule plants are. And really, most of the peat soils that we have throughout the Delta are built from tules. If you dig down far enough, that's still undecomposed tules down in this in the soil that hasn't been exposed to oxygen for thousands of years. So as long as you don't have oxygen, tule is a very long-lasting plant material relative to other plants.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I just want to share a thought with you. And this is harvest season, and as I've been going through all the fields, I've been shocked at how much material is left behind. And in speaking to some of the farmers and the farm workers, asking why is so much left behind? Why is there so much either left on trees or on the floor in the fields? And they say, well, the consumers are very picky. They want a pear, an apple, asparagus and broccoli to look a certain way. And if it doesn't look that way, we don't pick it. And I thought, how much would we save in the amount of water in fields if we were less picky consumers, right? Or if we found a more beneficial use to that had a market value. And I just thought that how much does that contribute to emissions and methane production and to especially in a state so as huge as California, the #1 agricultural producer in the country. What does that mean to our air quality? And generally in those communities, when I go there, I represented one, they tend to have the highest asthma rates, not only in the state, but in the country. And that's something to think about. Anyway, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Senator. I do think it's worth just noting, and maybe for another discussion, the carbon market conversation versus how that money is spent. I think there's sort of three outstanding questions that aren't necessarily part of your research, but important. Carbon markets fundamentally put a price on carbon. And then the question of how they're monetized and how we encourage investment in nature-based solutions, I think, are follow-on questions to that. And then the final one is then how does the legislature and the governor spend the money? I think what we want to be really clear on is carbon markets, because they price pollution. That is what you're seeing globally and in California as the intent to reduce emissions, by encouraging investments in the offsets, and the delta is a great point on the offset. So I just want to be sure we're not kind of conflating the three different issues. And I do think that's what happens a lot with the cap and invest and carbon market conversation. It can be a follow-on conversation, but it seems like maybe an important one in the future. The question I have about the salinity for methane reduction versus how we keep the delta fresh, especially in terms of being a freshwater resource in the state. I know you're saying that the research is just starting and that salt can help with methane reduction, but is there any concern that while we're trying to reduce carbon, we will be adding salt to the delta, or is it just not enough salt to have that kind of impact?
I guess I should highlight that the sites that we look at are span a salinity gradient. Because we study sites that are actually out in the bay where it's just ocean water, so very salty, and then we have purely freshwater sites, and that the site that I showed you, Mayberry, sits in the middle. So as Tyler said, it's just down at the mouth of the river, so right at the beginning of the delta. So there is some salt water coming in, and it depends on the balance of fresh water coming down from the mountains, and so some years it's saltier, some years it's more fresh. So for that particular system, there is this natural salt that's happening there farther up in the delta. I mean, I think we're not talking about adding salt to wetlands to suppress methane emissions. But, it's something to be aware of, especially as sea levels rise, we're going to see more salt coming in further. And as, in drought years, we see the salt going up. And I see it in my data all the time. It does impact the methane emissions.
Fascinating. Well, that was fantastic. Any other final questions? Emma, any public comment?
I think Dr. Windemeyer has a few closing notes, and then we'll call for public comment.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Great, thanks. If we can get the next slide, then we'll go through about 5 minutes of updates. It's also in your packet. In August, we had our kickoff of the 8 Delta Research Awards of 2025 that were funded by or that are being facilitated through the Sea Grant process. We had brief presentations and introductions among the principal investigators and their teams. There was an additional 2 funded this year by state water contractors, and you'll hear a little bit on one of those from Dr. Acuna later this morning. Again, these are 8 multi-year high priority projects that are responsive to the science action agenda that you heard about at the August Council. And then we'll provide updates on those projects as they progress. In September, we had our much awaited California Sea Grant Fellows Matching Workshop. It's a very intensive process. And it's where our science program and the planning and performance division interviews state policy fellows, which you are aware of. These are all postgraduates. They're interested in public sector careers at the science policy interface. And you've come to know and value many fellows over the years during these 12-month fellowships, and we're looking forward to the next cohort. So things on your radar. On August 7th, the DPIC, Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, the Restoration Subcommittee met here with presentations on wetland restorations from the Nature Conservancy and conservation farms and ranches on Staten Island. And then they heard another presentation by the WebTrack Wetland Restoration Project, which again, you heard about in June here at Council. And then the Point Blue Conservation Science team highlighted bird community responses to tidal wetland restoration. It's a biannual meeting, and so the next DPIC Restoration Subcommittee meeting will be in 2026, early in the year. So next, a biennial meeting every 2 years. The Adaptive Management Forum is coming up. It's held to increase capacity for adaptive management in the Delta. It's going to be a hybrid event this year. So day 1 is here in the CNRA building, Tuesday, October 14th from 9 to 5. But also it's on Zoom. On day 2 is a half-day field trip to Lookout Slough. The restoration project there was breached last summer and at over 3,000 acres. I want to highlight again, this is the largest single tidal reintroduction in the whole country. You can see the registration and agenda information online, and attendance already looks to be high and quite diverse. Today happens to be the last day to submit a poster abstract if anyone would like to share a research or management or implementation project at the meeting. So hope you'll be there. Then coming up is on Monday, October 27th at lunchtime, we have an organized session with the CNRA Secretary Speakers Series. It's on climate change and extreme events. This will have 6 presenters across the council and independent science board. And in addition to focusing on those topics, we're going to highlight chapters of the 2025 State of Bay Delta Science issue. And the ones that we're going to focus on are governance, wildfires, and atmospheric rivers. So I hope you tune into that. You'll be hearing more about the State of Bay Delta Science in the next presentation. And the next 2 days after that, closing out October, will be the State of the Estuary Conference in Oakland, California. And this is, again, a highlight we look forward to. Our science programs are represented in 2 panel sessions and 3 posters this year. The San Francisco Estuary Partnership organizes this event every 2 years to highlight current management and ecological health in the San Francisco Bay Delta Estuary. With more metrics from the Delta this year also included in the 5-year report card called State of Our Estuary. So that'll be something to look forward to and release compared to the 2019 version where we were less represented. And the registration is open and online, and the agenda is there as well. So those are things coming up. I think we can go to by the numbers. Take a look at our year or the last month in water. And just by looking at this, you can see it's been a mild summer here in the Delta. You might know that already. But some things to highlight compared to the historical average. The key reservoirs are all above normal here. And overall, the metrics look a little bit better than August compared to, again, that 20-year history. Flows are up in the San Joaquin even, which we were concerned about earlier, but they're up, and they're up for Sacramento, the San Joaquin, and also for the diversions and the Central Valley Project and State Water Project pumping south. So again, this shouldn't be a surprise because it was a mild summer, but I don't want you to get too relaxed because you're about to hear about hydroclimate whiplash and what to be prepared for. And so I think we can close this and take any questions.
Great. I'm going to just note that we're running about a half hour behind schedule. So I just want to be really mindful of everyone's time. Really appreciate that. We'll see if there's any public comment as maybe we get ready for your next panel. Any public comment, Emma?
There is no public comment, Madam Vice Chair.
Great. So I'll just see if our next 2 panels can maybe, we'll just see if we can just slightly limit our timing. We'll go a little bit over, but I do think it's important to respect time.
Is there a reason why it has to, why we?
We just want to respect everyone's time and travel arrangements and potential loss of a quorum. So
Okay.
appreciate it. Thank you. So I'll turn it back to you, Lisa Marie.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you, Drs. Anthony and Zelwich, and we'll switch out, and I'm going to invite up Program Manager Maggie Chrisman and Senior Environmental Scientist Denise Colombano to give our next presentation from the science program. This is, one of the best products we've come out with, not just this year, but in quite a while. So I'm pretty happy about them being able to present this today. And this is, again, our State of Bay Delta Science Special Edition, the Extreme Events Edition.
Can we bring up the slides, please? Maybe while they're coming up, I'll start. So I'm very excited. Thank you, everyone, council members. I'm excited to be here today with my colleague, Dr. Denise Colombano, to share about this latest release of the State of Bay Delta Science and to continue some of the conversation we've been having this morning on climate science and how it's very relevant to the Delta. So in June, you might remember our team shared about a synthesis initiative that involved pulling together data sets to ask new questions and learn new insights. This is a little different take on synthesis that we're going to be talking about today. Here, instead of data sets that we're pulling together, we're talking about the knowledge that's coming out of a diverse number of research projects and looking at them in new ways to answer how well we understand critical Bay Delta issues. So the State of Bay Delta Science, or SBDS as short, I'll try to avoid using the acronym, but I slip into it, so I'll define it up front. It's a synthesis and communication project that's been coordinated by the Delta Science Program for over 17 years. To date, we've produced 4 editions, which ask the questions that you see here on the slide. So we want to know what we've learned about the Delta or what we're learning, particularly in recent years. We look at what is still unknown. So what do we need to know to move forward? And where do we go next, especially with respect to science and management in the future? So the first two editions covered a broad set of topics and were spaced about 8 years apart. But a few years ago, we moved into a model where we're releasing editions a bit more frequently and looking at a more narrow range of topics each. The last edition, for example, in 2022, focused on plants and algae because there'd been a lot of recent research at the time looking at emerging issues related to aquatic weeds, harmful algal blooms, and actually carbon sequestration and subsidence, which you just heard about today. That chapter was authored by our lead scientist, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers. So it's much more than a summary of things we already know, though importantly it does capture that. The State of Bay Delta Science also looks at hundreds of individual reports and publications so that we can generate new takeaways and insights. So we won't spend too much time on process today, but we do want to share a little bit just to add context for what this project involves. There's two main phases to our work. The first is the synthesis that I've been talking about, where we're pulling together information. So for this, the science program coordinates teams of authors to research assigned topics and draw on the wealth of available information that's out there. The teams then develop an article which undergoes peer review and publication in the open access San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science Journal. And then once those are out, we focus on communicating their outcomes. And I should mention that we make sure that these outcomes are shared more broadly. In practice, this means that we're conducting outreach so that scientists know about these articles and know that they're there for them to use. We try to make sure that these articles, while they're still technical and published in a scientific journal, they're meant to be accessible so that you don't have to be a climate modeling expert in order to understand a chapter on climate change, for example. People like me, who's a plant ecologist, can understand those chapters and still move forward. Secondly, we also want to create other management and executive summaries so that we can highlight the takeaways for audiences who don't have time to dig into full technical reports. So this project is really important, and I really want to emphasize that in the next two slides. It plays a few critical roles in Delta Science. First and foremost, we're building a shared body of knowledge. This is aligned with the vision laid out in the Delta Science Plan of One Delta and One Science. It represents a major contribution to Delta Science. When I first joined the science program 11 years ago, one of my first projects was working on the 2016 edition of SBDS. I did it. I knew I was going to drop the acronym. Sorry. But one of my first assignments was this, and being new to the Delta at the time as a younger scientist, those papers quickly brought me up to speed on what the priority topics were, where we were with understanding them, and where we were moving next. This body of knowledge is also used by us to inform updates to things like the Delta Science Plan and the Science Action Agenda. The Science Action Agenda, in turn, guides our funding priorities. Altogether, these relationships form something we call the Delta Science Strategy. But ultimately, the goal for all of this work is to support future management actions and decision-making needs. We're distilling outcomes from numerous studies into a handful of clear takeaways and bridging a connection between science and management. So the last thing I'll say before we dive into what the 2025 edition explores is just to highlight that this project has significant readership and engagement. If you look at the journal at the last two editions, the journal's been accessed over 58,000 times, and articles have been downloaded over 18,000 times, which is pretty significant because we're only talking about 22 articles. Citations are shown here, so that's a measure, it's one way that scientists measure the impact of their work. That's a measure of how many times somebody else has pointed in their paper to your paper as a key source of information. And for these 22 articles, it's almost 700 times. Two of the most popular articles I want to highlight. One is from the 2016 edition. It was a great chapter. It started out with a haiku about Delta Smelt, but it has about 130 citations. It's one of the most cited in the journal's history. And then Dr. Rafe Kudela authored a chapter more recently on harmful algal blooms, and it has an impressive number of citations for just being out for 2 years. So this doesn't capture the full picture. These papers are also being cited in a range of management and policy documents. We won't go into that today because I want to get to the next part of this presentation, which is the 2025 edition. So this edition, like previous ones, was produced under the guidance of an editorial board. That includes our Delta lead scientist, science program staff, and distinguished scientists such as the former Delta lead scientist, Dr. Cliff Daum, and retired USGS scientist, Dr. Jan Thompson. So several years ago, this editorial board looked ahead and identified extreme weather and climate events as a priority theme for a future edition. At the time, the state of California had recently experienced several billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. And this was before many of the most recent destructive wildfires happened of the last few years. In fact, authors were in the middle of drafting a paper on wildfires when the park fire near Chico broke out and ultimately became the 4th largest fire in California history. So as we heard today, this is very timely to be coming out with this edition. We'll share in a few slides about how this connects to some other efforts going on regarding climate science. But I just want to say before I hand it over to Denise to walk through what each of these articles kind of is telling us, that while we are focusing here on some pretty significant and heavy sounding, disastrous sounding themes, each of these articles is exploring them from a perspective of being solution oriented. So we're highlighting in each of these chapters avenues that are promising for effective science informed management. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Denise.
Thank you, Maggie, for the great introduction. I'm really honored to be part of this effort to understand climate change and extreme events in the Delta. I've found it personally very rewarding and fascinating to be part of this, and so I'm excited to share what we've learned so far today. What have we learned? Well, first and foremost, we've learned that extreme events, which are heat waves, wildfires, droughts, and atmospheric rivers, are the new normal. They're becoming the new normal in the Delta. And while we may all know from our lived experiences of, being out in the world, reading the news, that these extreme events are the new normal, so there may not be a surprise. This assertion is now well supported by the data analyses and the literature reviews that have come out as part of this effort. Climate models are being refined on a continual basis, but we're pretty confident about how these events will change with further warming. Many will become more frequent, more intense, larger, or longer by the middle of the 21st century. For example, precipitation patterns are projected to become more extreme, with dry years getting drier and wet years getting wetter, due to changes in atmospheric rivers, which are responsible for the bulk of California's water supply. We're already seeing that heat waves in both the air and water in the Delta are increasing in frequency and intensity, not only in the summer when we expect heat waves, but also in the shoulder months of spring and fall. And this is actually a good example of a finding that we all know because we walk around outside. But it now has a robust data analysis and peer-reviewed article to back it up that did not exist before this effort. Notably, we've just experienced the 8 largest wildfires in California history in the last 7 years. And every single one of them has occurred in the Delta watershed. Now, these are just a few snippets of things we've learned. The full story is much more nuanced. There's dozens of pages of reports and facts. But above all, we've learned that these extreme events, they're already challenging our natural resource management approaches and our existing water infrastructure, much of which was designed for a 20th century climate that no longer exists. What do we still need to know? Well, water management faces major uncertainties. For example, we lack accurate seasonal forecasting tools. So right now, it's the end of September. We're approaching the start of a new water year. We can only accurately forecast what's coming in the next few weeks. And here's an example. At this time of the year, back in 2021, we didn't yet have any indication that early season storms were on the horizon, and that by October 24th, we'd see record-breaking rainfall, 15 inches of precipitation produced by 3 consecutive atmospheric rivers. That was accompanied by high winds, high surf, flooding, downed trees, power outages, and mudslides across the Bay Area. We had some indication about 3 weeks in advance that there would be increased storm activity, but the storms weren't actually well forecasted until about 3 to 6 days in advance. And a really good forecast would be about 10 days. We also didn't have any indication that after this record-breaking event, we'd have a disappointingly dry winter. That was another surprise. In addition to that, we know relatively little about reservoir water quality after major wildfires. This is a concern. The wildfire article describes how reservoirs capture the toxic debris flows that are occurring when storms produce runoff on recent burn scars. And yet 80% of California's water supply passes through reservoirs. Overall, the extent to which the combined effects, so not just wildfires, not just atmospheric rivers, but all these things in tandem, how these will transform ecosystems and affect people living in the Delta remains unclear. So where do we go from here? I'm going to give you some broad brush takeaways. Adaptive, data-driven, and equitable governance can help prepare us for the challenges ahead. A great example is Delta Adapts, the climate adaptation planning process that the council initiated in 2018. Now, Delta Adapts is a proactive, collaborative effort that embraces the, sorry, I started talking about social science, complex governance structure, which is comprised of numerous local, state, and federal institutions with overlapping authorities. While it takes significant time to build relationships and trust among partners and communities, there's great potential for Delta Adapts to help push forward climate adaptation strategies that center equity among people living in the Delta. And next, to strengthen innovation and learning in the Delta, we can apply new and sophisticated tools and techniques. We can harness the big data revolution and streamline flows of information to decision makers and to early warning detection systems. We can leverage the many effective practices that are already in place, a major strength of the Delta. If you're interested in learning more about these points and more, please check out the synthesis article. This is something that I co-authored with the editorial board. It's our major takeaways, and it provides a vision for the future of Delta science to inform management in the era of climate change and extreme events. Now, my last slide is that I just want to show that the State of Bay Delta Science asks how well we understand this science on climate change. The Delta Independent Science Board recently had a climate symposium that asks how well agencies are using the latest climate change science. California's 5th climate change assessment for the Delta region helps communities understand and prepare for climate change by compiling the best available science. And Delta Adapts, as I just mentioned, recommends strategies to integrate climate adaptation in actions and investments. And this edition of Bay Delta Science that we're talking about provides the best possible science that supports these statewide initiatives here. So for more information, please visit our website to find links to the peer review articles. We don't expect everyone to read these lengthy and technical articles, so we have some really nice short summaries if you're interested in getting the basic facts. And we have some really interesting upcoming events that Lisa Marie talked about. One is the Secretary Crowfoot Speaker Series, and then also the State of the Estuary Conference in Oakland. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Colombano and Dr. Chrisman. I think we can open this up for questions.
Great, thank you very much. Councilmember Svengali.
That was terrific. Thank you. With permission, I'm going to drag you back into the social sciences just for a second, because I'm interested in the finding that we need to have a greater awareness of the impact on vulnerable communities. If you could just elaborate a little bit on why that's important, and most importantly to me, what are the mechanisms for doing that? How do we do a better job of that? Thank you. It's okay.
So I'm also not a social scientist, but I actually really loved the governance chapter and kept quoting it back to one of the authors of it actually at the ISB Climate Symposium, one of our breakout sessions. So one of the things that we didn't really say in this just now was that one of the perspectives that we were trying to have as we developed all of these articles was we asked authors to not just look at the natural system, but to consider the communities of the Delta and how all of these extreme events are happening. And so that is done with the atmospheric rivers chapter in terms of flooding. The heat waves chapter does an excellent job talking about how heat is one of the biggest stressors on people in the Delta. It's one of the leading causes of death, I guess, in terms of the climate change. And so all of these issues also resonate strongly with the priority areas that are in our environmental justice issue paper that was released earlier this year. And so I think there's a lot of connections around here. In terms of what we're seeing, we could go into a lot of details about how each of these different stressors is having an impact on people. But I think what the governance chapters really emphasized to me in particular was how there's disproportionate, effects of some of these on disadvantaged communities, and how we really need to be thinking about including them and including those communities and considering what they need as we're developing solutions, because what scenarios we think are desirable has to take that into account. And we need to make sure that we're moving forward in a way that includes people at the table in developing these solutions. And so I think that's why we were highlighting Delta Adapts. There's a few other initiatives highlighted in that chapter about how ways we're being more anticipatory and inclusive in our processes. But in terms of, I don't know did you want to mention Delta Resident Survey? Connect it back to that too. Not, it's fine. Does that answer your question a bit? Sorry.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And anything else, Councilmember Burgess?
Over the last few years, one of the questions I've asked, and we've seen some scientific evidence, is that these very big fire events create smoke, which impact the weather patterns. Is that included in this?
The wildfire paper has a particular emphasis on impacts on water quality, because that was really something that is unknown and doesn't exist in the Delta yet, is a compilation of our understanding of, okay, what happens when a forest, like a whole watershed now can get burned.
Right.
And if there's a community there, all the compounds and sediment and nutrients and everything that gets mobilized, and if a storm comes through, mobilizes that and then brings it into the soils and water. So
Right.
that particular paper emphasizes the role of wildfire smoke really only in like drinking water taste and smell and whatnot. And we don't look at how it then has feedbacks with the weather.
So that was my next question related to water quality. Depending on the size of the fire, and like you said, if there's homes and businesses and all of that, plus it's my understanding the hotter the fire, the more impact it has on what is the result of going into the water. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, and so I've been asking also, we'll see it there maybe at the reservoir, and then what are we seeing downstream? And is there something that we need to do to deal with that?
That's a fascinating point that I learned, is the role of reservoirs in capturing debris flows. Dams get a bad rap a lot of the time, but they're actually providing a benefit in capturing those flows, and then it might be why we're not seeing a lot of downstream effects.
So it is filtering it.
It's filtering it and burying it, I guess. But there is very little research on quantifying that.
Sure.
That needs to be done more. That's a major gap. Yeah.
And that water quality has impacts on the fish that people are dependent on in the Delta, some for their food source. I think the it also, especially with the heat, impacts the harmful algae blooms that we're seeing, and maybe chemistry wise too. I'm also curious about the comparison of prevention and clearing. You know, we're talking about methane and CO2. Can we, I think there's some sort of economic comparison that's interesting on that. So thank you for this. I will be reading it.
Thank you.
Can I just say that this is so much information that they have been able to distill in a really excellent, concise presentation. So thank you so much.
Yes, that it's remarkable. Who said that if I had more time, I would have said less? Was that Mark Twain? So well done. Lisa Marie, any closing comments?
No, but I do encourage you to read the summaries that are posted. They're excellent, and the papers themselves have incredible graphics as well. I would highlight that, and also invite you to listen in on that speaker series, because I think we'll be highlighting some of these more contextual, what do you call it, conversational ways.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you both. Remarkable work. Emma, is there any public comment on this item?
There is not, Madam Vice Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. We are now going to move to our next panel. Thank you, Henry. And I'll turn it over to Henry. Is it DeBay? I'm pronouncing every. I got it. See, I got one out of two. I'm 50%. And we'll provide context and introduce our next guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we're going to keep this science extravaganza going, although I don't have a haiku. Do you have a haiku?
No, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. No, I did not.
So good morning, Chair, council members, Councilmember Patterson, welcome. So my name is Henry DeBay. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for Science at the Council, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Sean Acuna, who's a Principal Resources Specialist at the Metropolitan Water District, who's going to talk about 3 Delta Smelt research projects the Metropolitan is leading on Bolden Island in the Delta. Just by way of a bit of background or reminders, perhaps, the Delta Smelt is a 2 to 3 inch long fish you may have heard about that exists only in the Delta and the broader estuary. Their population level is extremely low, and they're listed on state and federal Endangered Species Act lists. And because their population level directly influences water supply operations, there are significant efforts underway to recover the population, including by trying to grow Delta Smelt in hatcheries to supplement the wild population, the same way that salmon, the wild population of salmon is supplemented by salmon hatcheries. So recent experiments for doing this with Delta Smelt have been promising, but they're quite costly and logistically complex. So there's a need for further innovation. So as a water wholesaler and recipient of State Water Project water, Metropolitan has a vested interest in investing in Delta Smelt research. So to that end, Sean will present on 3 exciting Delta Smelt research projects that are focused on figuring out the feasibility and cost effectiveness of 1, growing Delta Smelt rather than in hatcheries in man-made ponds in the Delta, and Sean will show you what that looks like. 2, growing food for Delta Smelt, so that's basically bugs in the water for the Delta Smelt to eat. Growing food for Delta Smelt in those ponds using something called artificial floating wetlands, which sounds magical, but you'll also see what that looks like. And Sean will describe this in more detail. And 3, determining if Delta Smelt can then be safely extracted from those ponds and released into the wild and survive. So some of this work was presented to the council back in April of 2024. And the council was interested in future updates, and so this is following up on that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be able to speak to you today about the work we've been doing at Metropolitan. We're really proud of it, and I'd like to thank first my collaborators at UC Davis, USGS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and DWR for which none of this could have worked. So thank you. The slides, there we go. So I'll quickly go over the outline. We're going to go a little bit of background. Some of it was already touched on by my colleague here, Henry, and a little bit on what an impoundment is, which is a fancy term for pond, or man-made pond, and our 3 studies that we've been trying to conduct. So a little background on us is that Metropolitan, as was stated before, we're a wholesaler. A third of our water comes from the State Water Project, which is one of 2 of the major water projects in the Delta. So the Delta is really essential to us, and it helps meet our mission and goal, which is to supply high quality water in a sustainable and ecologically sustainable manner. Now, all of our work in the Bay Delta Initiatives Program, which is the program I'm a part of, supports state water contractors and DWR science to help meet that mission in the San Francisco estuary. And we try to do this in a management relevant and a collaborative, and it is an innovative space. As was noted before, Delta Smelt is in not really good conditions, pretty dire. These are just some of the surveys that we have here. As you can see, as you go from earlier to later in the time series, we're getting fewer and fewer indications of Delta Smelt in the wild. And just this past year, we've only collected 3 officially in our surveys for the next coming cohort. And it's almost entirely being supported by these wild releases of hatchery fish. And this is really important because that's where our efforts are going towards, is trying to support these wild releases of hatchery fish. In the past 4 years, wild releases have escalated. We've had between 43 to 125,000 fish being produced at the hatcheries. This hatchery has been going way above and beyond it was designed to do, was about like 25,000 fish all the way to 125,000 fish. These fish were released in different parts of the Delta. Here are some of the examples in red that we were able to put them in. And the target is by 2030, 500,000 fish. Now, currently the production of these fish is in the millions per year. That would be between 4 and 5 times that cost in order to produce that. So that's a considerable dollar amount. Now, how do we find ways to address this? Now, we recognize the problem, and I like to say that there are plenty of problems in the Delta. There's no shortage of problems. There are shortages of solutions, and I'd like to work on those instead. So I'm trying to work on a solution to the problem I just identified, that is cost in producing these fish into the wild, and one of them are impoundments. And as I mentioned, impoundments is just a fancy term for a man-made pond. A pool is an impoundment. Reservoirs are impoundments. In our case, that we are trying to use some of the ponds that are on our island. So the islands that we're talking about are the ones in the Delta, as you would probably guess. And Bolden Island is the one that you may be familiar with. It's the one that has Highway 12 going across it. It's there on the top, and as for that's circled. And impoundments are used quite often in the recovery of species. Razorback sucker is one on the Colorado, silvery minnow on the Rio Grande, and Chinook salmon here in California. Production, if you want to produce more, it's going to cost more. So we felt like this might be a good solution for that. We can provide access and help with the habitat quality assessments for research institutions like UC Davis, as well as efforts by DWR. So our purpose is to optimize putting the fish from the hatchery into the wild. 2 ways we're going to try and do that is how do we produce more of them, and how do we make them bigger? The more there are, perhaps the more will last, and the bigger there are, the more it is believed that they will more likely to survive and reproduce. So to promote that recovery, we want to help produce this, and this is going to be through survival and reproduction. And this is important for Metropolitan because as far as from what we can tell, the permits operated by the State Water Project to protect Delta Smelt can be upwards between to about 390,000 acre feet on average. So it's really important that we try to recover the species to help with that water supply. This is just a list of all the collaborators we have. We have quite a few. UC Davis to name our primary collaborations. Fleury Madut is on the upper right of that cluster of 4 on the bottom left. He is our main lead PI. USGS from FedFire on the upper left. Nan Fang's lab is the primary lab, which is she's on the bottom left. And Dennis Cottrell is our technical expert who helps a lot with our restoration. We also have those of independent nature. Steve Deverell, Hydrofocus, was mentioned earlier, and Bruce Herbold, who actually inspired me to do this work. So our studies are about, as I mentioned before, about producing more fish and bigger fish. In some cases, both. The survival study, the fish harvest study, and the fish growth study. Now, the fish growth study is also known as Fit for the Wild. It was mentioned by your lead scientist here about the UC Davis producing bigger, more fit fish in the wild. So that was mentioned a little bit earlier in the call for studies that are being promoted. And so we're trying to meet that 500,000 fish in the Delta. Our first study, which was the survival study, it was more like a pilot. We put fish in cages. This is an example of the cage in that picture inset. And we were able to grow fish pretty well. It was actually, weren't really sure that was going to happen. I was pretty certain, but I was being optimistic potentially, but perhaps not, because we actually had greater than 90% survival on average for all of our fish that were deployed in both the late fall and spring. In fact, some of our fish actually grew better than those fish that were deployed in the wild in cages during the fall season. We actually had a greater increase in growth, while the fish that similar fish in the Delta actually decreased in weight. For our fish growth study, which is roughly the Fit for the Wild study that was mentioned earlier, it is trying to pair floating wetlands. So this is the artificial floating wetlands that was mentioned earlier. They're basically floating wetlands. If you have any experience with reservoirs or toxicology, stormwater, these are used quite often. You'll actually see them in the middle of ponds, even on golf courses, where they're just designed to help reduce nutrients, make the pond a little cleaner, and help out with a lot of things. We're trying to repurpose that technology to produce food instead. And we hope that maybe some carbon sequestration as well. But we already know that tules, which are native species out in the Delta, naturally float. We can help use that and try to see if we can produce more food in these ponds, make them more natural for Delta Smelt to eat natural food and help them grow. And that's the idea. If they can grow in a more naturalized environment, perhaps they'll survive better in the wild. Here's the tules. As you can see, they're pretty common out in the Delta. They have these thick root mats that are really useful, produce lots of food, and it's really good for the fish. Here's an example of the food that we had that we measured. We measured food coming off of these floating wetlands versus the river. Hands down, a lot more food, bigger fish. For this growth study, what we did was we had an enclosure where we put it out in the middle of the pond, put the floating wetlands there. So those are wetlands that are floating in that yellow boom there. They are not anchored to the ground at all. They're just sitting there. They grew fairly well. We even actually had birds land on them and kind of like waddle around in there. And over there are these circles. Those are the cages that we deployed out in the ponds, and we put Delta Smelt in there to see how well they're doing. Now, this is just the first year. Last year was done. We want to continue doing it, so we only have preliminary data right now, but it looks pretty promising that it does produce more food. We're hoping that it also translates to bigger fish. For the fish harvest study, which is trying to get fish out of a pond, there are two principles in aquaculture. When you're farming a fish, you need to be able to have a container, whatever that container be a pond or a tank. You need to know two things: how to get something in and how to get something out. That sometimes is ignored. Like, how do you get the water in? You got to turn the water in. You got to have your water source, and then once you fill that tank, you have to be able to empty it. If you have to empty it at a certain speed, fast or slow, what do you need to do? Same thing goes for the fish. How do you get the fish in without killing them? How do you get them out? Same reason. So these are some of our ponds that we have out there in the Delta. These were just going to be there anyway because we need to shore up our levees with materials. So we have to dig out, borrow materials from one part of the island and put it on the levees to help secure the levees. This is a common practice in the Delta. All the islands do this. I just asked them to put them in a certain shape so it kind of looks like something I can maybe grow some fish into. Our preliminary results suggest that those ponds are still way too deep. As was talked about earlier, there's a lot of subsidence. Groundwater infiltration is just so much pressure is pushing on the edges. We pumped using a really massive pump for over 3 days, could not get the last 4 feet of water out of that pond. It was just too much head pressure, which is like, it was too much. So that naturally means that we need a shallow pond. We are pivoting to a shallow pond that's nearby. This was also some borrowed material that was produced this pond, so we're going to use this pond. We've already scoured it out, laid out some bedrock, some pebbles on the bottom to help with the Delta smelt so they don't get too concerned with like burrowing or anything like that, get trapped. We have a little shallow area, that's what that box is. That box is going to get cut, and then we're going to pump the fish out of there and help see if they can survive. So this is our produce more fish part of the studies. Now, what did we learn? How do we produce more fish? Ponds are definitely a viable option. There are some concerns about temperature. We're working on that. There are concerns about bird predation. We're also working on that. We have our partners at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that are informing us with their national aquaculture programs that they already have expertise in. So we're leaning on their expertise to help us with those solutions. We want to produce bigger fish. We think we can do that with these ponds, and we think we can do that with the floating wetlands. I also believe that these floating wetlands could be a viable option for habitat restoration to help with aquatic weeds. You can, I mean, if you had tules outside your house, if you happen to have a house along the Delta, wouldn't you rather see the tules as opposed to all the aquatic weeds? I know hyacinths have flowers, but I prefer the tules. So our next steps are more fish growth studies, more the fish harvest studies, and we're going to hope that we can continue to work on farming Delta smelt in the Delta and promote more fish for wild release. If you have any questions, thank you. Oh, yeah, if there's time, I do have a short, I think it's a almost 3-minute video on this subject that we produced.
Let's just make sure we get the questions first, and then we'll make sure we can do the video. Thank you very much, Councilmember Zingali.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Dr. Acuna. So those numbers you gave us at the beginning, they got all the way up to 125,000, I think,
yes,
in 2025. Did those fish all survive, or is that how many were introduced, and then there's a survival rate after that?
It was more of the latter. So 125,000, that's why they want to go to 500,000 fish. Based on the modelers from the Bureau of Reclamation, it's actually U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Their targets are to try to get at least 100 fish in their surveys by December from releases in the previous winter. So 125,000 is not enough to do that. They think roughly about 500,000 would do it.
So what is the survival rate on those numbers, on the like 125,000 number?
Seems pretty varied, but right now, because of the preliminary nature of the surveys, it's hard to tell. They've only collected between a few score every year, and they need a lot more years of data to be accurate about that. But it's not terribly high. That was not expected anyway, because they are an annual species. So even if they survived, they are going to spawn, and they tend to die after that. So we're releasing them as adults to spawn, and so they would naturally die anyway. So it's not really concerning yet as to why we're not catching a lot, but we would have preferred to have caught more, because that gives us an understanding that the survival after release is good enough to support Delta smelt to spawn. All we can do is look at how many larvae we see later. We have seen an increase in that. And as I mentioned, there are 3 juveniles that are collected. I know it doesn't seem a lot, but every time you got to think about a trawl that's, I don't know, not much, doesn't go much further than twice the width of this table. So the length, this width right here, across a body of water that is much like 3 times the width of this room. So Yes, they can be eaten, and that's okay, actually.
Can you give a maybe unpublished order of magnitude of survival based on, oh, sorry. Can you give just a rough estimate, order of magnitude of that 125,000 fish released? How many? Is it 10? Is it 100? Is it 1,000?
I wish I could.
Okay.
I cannot. I would defer to you to talk to DWR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They've probably created that analysis. But as far as whenever they report it to us, they said it's too early. They need more years of data to provide us that number. So unfortunately, I've not been informed that actual number.
But in that one study, there was a 90% survival rate, right?
Yes, but those are in cages. So yeah, but yeah.
And does that mean they survived long enough to spawn? Is that how you define survival?
We defined survival as the length of the study. It was about 6 weeks.
Got it.
So they survived 6 weeks in the cages without any trouble. It was believed when we first started the study, we were informed that it was doubtful they would last 6 days. And so they did fairly well.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions from the board? No? Then can we go ahead and play the video? Is that possible? Thank you.
And Sean is available for autographs after the meeting.
Thank you. I'd have to actually put it out to our outreach, our extension specialists, Kevin Mann and Kevin Matt. Yes, they're both named Kevin, and they put a amazing package there.
Indeed. Daniel, who knows a lot about this, just said how great you are on video. So
Oh.
that's a high compliment.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate
Not
that.
everybody has it. Good job.
Got a lot of coaching.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Emma, any public comment?
We have no public comment.
Great, thank you. Well, Lisa Marie, this was just extraordinarily well done, the science extravaganza, and really appreciate you and Henry and the entire team. And certainly we can go into the weekend optimistic that we are doing some incredible work and sharing it with everyone. And our science program is a great, great beacon of light in this world where we haven't respected science as much. So thank you for that. Anything else? Still no public comment? Do we have one last?
I always feel like I'm supposed to say, and no public comment in Eureka.
No. I know, it's so nice to have you here. No.
And we'll just close our meeting out.
So I did want to make a comment about preparation for our next council meeting. You know, I sit on over 30 different committees, commissions, boards, and all of that. And I have the unique privilege to serve on this committee for a second time. We have a 2-year term when we're the chair of the Delta Protection Commission. And when I took on this role, it was my understanding that we would have a 2-day commitment to this meeting, that it would be an all-day meeting. And I have had the privilege of getting to know the staff that work this meeting and prepare for this meeting. And I would really like to encourage my colleagues to plan to be here all day and to put aside that second day if we need it. These people work really, really hard. And I just 10 years ago barely made enough that we get paid for this committee. And I know there's state workers that work full time to get this, what we get paid to be on this committee. So if you can schedule yourself to be here and maybe meet with staff or meet with your colleagues to get to know us, because and I say this respectfully, but I just understand how hard people work. And the reason these meetings are here are for us to be more prepared, to be more informed, to allow the staff to, give the folks that are paying attention the information that they're working on. We have amazing staff. So this is my request, that if we have 2 days that we're supposed to commit to this position. And as a taxpayer, I take this responsibility very seriously. And so I'm hoping that I curbed my comments today, because I understand people might be flying out or need to go somewhere else. But I'm hoping that that'll be a little less pressure on our staff to move things faster. Thank you. Sorry if this came across disrespectfully.
Great, thank you. And I think we all agree we have incredible staff, so thank you. So our next council meeting will take place on Thursday, October 23rd here at the CNRA building, and the materials will be posted for further information and updates. And with that, thank you. And thank you again, Lisa Marie. Take care, everyone.